The Janae stay warm by sleeping with a friend. Commander Riker wants to inspect Soren's variety of plant life. And a warrior does not let a friend face danger alone. Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Seventh Rule with Sirach Lofton.
Hello.
My name is Ryan T. Husk, and today we are doing a review of Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 5, Episode 17, The Outcast, written by Jerry Taylor, directed by Robert Shearer. This was Pi Day, May 14th, 1992. Also Stephen Curry's birthday. Wardell Stephen Curry, that is. How you doing today, Sirach?
Oh, really? That's his birthday?
Yeah, Pi Day.
Wow, okay. And his first name is Wardell?
That's where his dad got the name Del Curry, because they have the same name. He's junior. So Del Curry's name is Wardell Stephen Curry. He named his firstborn Wardell Stephen Curry Jr., but Stephen goes by his middle name.
Oh, man. I did not even know this. This is crazy that I'm just learning this.
If you ever see him, call him Wardell. He loves it.
Yeah, I bet.
I mean, whatever.
I didn't even know he was a junior. That's news to me. Anyways, yeah. So May 14th, 1992.
Okay.
What about this episode, though? I mean, this is
well, I'll tell you about this episode. Also, the reason Gary Payton II is called Gary Payton II and not Gary Payton Jr. is because his dad, Gary Payton, had two sons right around the same time, called them both Gary, and both mothers used his last name. So one is Gary Payton Jr., the other one is Gary Payton II. Interesting. Kind of.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, now for sure we're going to talk about Star Trek. Everybody, please make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell icon for notifications. If you're listening in, give us a 5-star rating and a nice review. We'd really appreciate that. And go visit us on patreon.com, I think. It's a little weird. Patreon.com/The Seventh Rule to be a part of this and support the show. We'd really appreciate that. All right, so this episode, I vaguely remember it. And I was told, don't forget that it's called The Outcast, not Outcast, because when you say Outcast, you think of the band. Yeah. And it's not that. So, okay. This one is interesting for a variety of reasons, a variety of plant life. One of the main reasons, or maybe the main reason, is because Star Trek tackles gender, sex, identity. One thing that it tackles that isn't new is that Riker's down to hump anything, whatever, anytime, anyone. Like, I'll be honest, when this episode started, it already felt like immediately Riker was like, hey, I'm Commander Riker. You know, like he doesn't even like every single alien species he meets, doesn't know anything about them. First thing he does, he's like, hey, so you want to, pilot a ship or do lunch or, what's your name?
Yeah, right. Riker is like the Fonz on Happy Days. Remember the Fonz, the cool guy that it always works out for him, I don't know. This was a good episode for me. I didn't initially think it was going to go where it went.
Mm-hmm. That's what Riker said.
No, because I mean, first of all, it had a short intro. I mean, the open was one of the quickest open. Oh, we're on our way to go visit this androgynous race of the Janae,
mm-hmm.
and and then we're going to do a probe, and the probe disappeared, and then cut, and I was like, okay. They were like, dun dun dun,
low stakes.
Yeah,
it's not like Klingon warbirds are attacking. I think Data's dead. None of that. It's just like, hey, our probe disappeared in null space. Some theoretical thing.
Yeah, so I was like, all right, like they found a black hole or something. I don't know, whatever it is, whatever the scientific equivalent of null space black hole in my mind. So, but it wasn't that much of a big. And I knew the setup was because they did say we're visiting these androgynous race, so that was like they kind of dropped that in your head in the
Yeah.
beginning with the open. So I'm like, okay, androgynous race probe. I'm like, what's this episode about? You know, and then we see. Oh, you were going to say something?
No, I was just gonna say, yeah,
Oh,
I agree. Like when that happens, you kind of know, okay, it's gonna be one of these exploring humanity or exploring social issues kind of thing.
right.
You can usually tell pretty quickly what kind of episode it's going to be. Now, sometimes it takes a big left turn or big, change in the theme that you think it is, but you could pretty much tell, right? They say androgynous. Um, I was immediately reminded of a Star Trek book that I read, and I think it was the Titan series, where Commander Riker is Captain Riker of the USS Titan. I think that's what it was. And they had an officer, I think it was a medical officer, that they called a hermat. It was a hermaphrodite. And I think it was like dog. It looked kind of like a dog, and it was called a hermat. It was kind of an alien species. Anyway, people in the comments can correct me because I know some of them have read these books and they know what I'm referring to from something I read like 20 years ago. But anyway,
Yeah.
so I thought about that. And anyway, I've got a lot to say on that because Star Trek has dipped its toes in these kinds of subjects before. I would feel like it should have done it way more, especially with alien species. You've got millions of alien species, and
You know.
only 4 of them are slightly different. But anyway, back to what you were saying.
Yeah, I mean, so then the story starts to unfold, and we begin to know that it's going to be a Riker centered episode fairly early because of the focal point. Usually, um, whoever is going to be the centerpiece of the episode is kind of brought forth in the beginning of the storyline, right, in the early scenes of the episode, and that's where we saw Riker um, talking about working together in the scientific way to explore the anomaly, and so that initially tells us that they're going to be the duo that's going to be problem solving. So that instantly pits them together in a storyline that we're going to see unfold, um, and so there I am saying, okay, let's see how this goes. I thought because it was an androgynous that Riker would have more of the questions, which was interesting because you would think I thought Riker was curious
Mm.
about
Oh,
some
he
things, right?
is.
He was, but it seems like the curiosity was also on the other side too. So
Yep.
even more so. So um, I like the interplay between them. I like the forwardness or not understanding that some things were being um, finding a way to bridge the communication gap between the two of them. That's basically what I felt like we were watching unfold. So um, Soren,
Yeah.
yeah, so Soren had um, a communication issue because when Soren was asking Riker about his sexual anatomy, he responded in a way that felt and looked uncomfortable, like whoa, like. And Soren said, hey, "Oh, is this not like appropriate, right, for
Yeah.
me to?" And Riker said, "We usually don't talk about this like casually and in this kind of a way." So what that tells me is communication wise between these two people, species, they're trying to learn how to communicate in a non-offensive way,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah. Good point.
And so then Riker then also strikes back with his communication methodology when he says, "Well, he must have been a really good teacher," and then he was corrected about the pronoun, and in that way he said, "Excuse me, I'm not used to doing this. It's going to be difficult for me. So please forgive me. I may slip and say here and
He or
there,
she, yeah.
he or she here and there. So I'm not being offensive. And, it's just me trying to get used to the language. And I think that to me talks about a communication between two people that is done on a level in which is not intended to be offensive.
Hmm.
And they've established that by communicating that in a reciprocal way. So I think that was one thing I noticed in the dialogue in those various scenes, was how that was being communicated, how they were understanding each other and trying to learn about each other without
Hmm.
sounding like, it's like anything. You have a curiosity about somebody and their lifestyle or their life choices, and
Hmm.
you don't want to be offensive when you ask these questions, like how do you pray, or what do you eat, or how do you fast, or whatever the question is that could it be interpreted as offensive if it's not said in the right tone or prefaced by, look, I'm not trying to be offensive. I'm really curious about, you know, the what the differences, what your cultural habits or practices are, or what your beliefs are, what your identity is. And so I think that was well expressed in this episode.
That's funny that you say that, because it actually reminds me of something that I've been accused of or hinted at in the past, especially when it comes to culture, because I'm usually like really interested in that. And sometimes that eagerness might frighten people that are watching. They're like, oh, don't. Like, I remember I had a girlfriend back in the day that got petrified when we went to a party and I met an African dude. He told me his name, clearly had an African name and an African accent. I was like, oh, hey, nice to meet you. What are you from Kenya or what? Like, I kind of tried to pinpoint it, and she was like mortified. Oh, you're not supposed. Don't don't ask him what part of Africa. I'm still to this day, I'm not sure, was that really bad? But when he answered, he was super excited. I think he said like that he was, or it was a very close nation to it. And I was like, great. What's it? And we talked and we ended up having a great time because I really was fascinated. But
Yeah.
she told me afterwards she was petrified. She's like,
Yeah.
don't ever do that again. My heart skipped a beat. But I was like, I love learning about this shit. And how many times am I going to get to actually meet somebody from there that can tell me about it? But anyway, so yes, good point there. And I think that Riker was, jokes aside, the right person to have this kind of discussion, not necessarily just because he wants to hump everything, but because he was able to make this conversation light and friendly and stress-free, which makes it usually comfortable, right? Picard, he'd be like afraid to, he'd have his butt so clenched, his crack would be eating his underwear. He'd be too like scared and too polite, which would put the other person kind of a little stressed. Troy would be too like, oh, and your feelings are okay. And the other person would be like, yeah, I know my feelings are okay. I'm just telling you. Worf would be a dick about it, Whereas Riker is just like, hey, so what is this exactly? Oh, that's it. Well, I'll do my best. That's fascinating. Please forgive me if this or that happens. I mean, I thought that was actually really well written and it was well chosen, delivered. When Soren says, oh, what are the physical differences between men and women or something? And he's like, he kind of gives like a smirk of like,
yeah,
well, you'll find out a little later, maybe, in at least half of them. But yeah, I thought he was the right choice for this kind of storyline, honestly.
I thought you'd never ask. Let's go back.
He's like, God, I had to wait 4 minutes to talk about this. Golly.
Yeah, forget all this science stuff. Yeah. Put it on autopilot. Yeah. but then so I'm figuring it out, and I thought it was interesting that they all had the Dumb and Dumber haircuts. I thought like they just all they need is a different barber on that planet.
Yeah, maybe that's what it is.
Because those hairdos were not doing it for me. Um, but I thought this episode was well written. You know, obviously, I think it must be there. It cannot be even really. Maybe somebody can, out there in the chat can tell us. But is there a earlier mention of gender identity and pronouns
Hmm.
being the
In Star
subject
Trek.
matter? Oh,
Yeah, I
not
don't
just
think
Star Trek
so.
on television. Forget Star Trek.
That's a
Just
good point.
on television in general, um, this particular thing, like what pronoun to use, like this is exactly. I don't think I can predate 1992
I can tell you
on this
one of
this
my
discussion.
favorite, one of my favorite, and one of the best science fiction movies, not television. So you're right there because that's a very different kind of medium, especially back then. Movies, you could do whatever you wanted. TV was a lot, more restricted. Now that's different. I feel like it was mid 80s, 85, 86. Enemy Mine. Louis Gossett Jr., Dennis Quaid. For my money, maybe the best sci-fi, my favorite sci-fi movie. And the alien, because it always, it's easy to understand. Oh, it's an alien. It's different. The alien they don't have genders. They don't have men or women. And apparently they just have a baby. It just comes on its own because I remember the funniest moment in the movie, and forgive me, I haven't seen it in like 30 years, so I could be getting this a little bit wrong, but basically the guy, I can't remember the alien's name, but he says, and I think he called him a he, but he says like, hey, he like kind of shows his stomach because he was like, oh, what's wrong? Are you sick? What's wrong? And he kind of goes like this, like he's pregnant. And then the Dennis Quaid character goes, what? Well, how did this happen? And he goes, don't look at me. Like his first one, I didn't do anything. But anyway, so what it was is it just, that's what science fiction allows us to do. It allows us to just say, hey, what about this kind of situation? What about this kind of scenario? And it makes it, obviously, we say a lot of times, it makes it a lot easier for us to learn lessons or understand things or expand our minds because it's an alien or it's 500 years in the future. But as far as
Yeah,
television, I can't think of any.
yeah, and that's what you just said is exactly why I think this is a great episode because this androgynous character Soren, who wanted to identify as a woman,
Mm-hmm.
was then going to be subject to the kind of psychiatric and abusive treatment that
Yeah.
was reserved for people who are not who are on the opposite side of that spectrum, who were at that time trying to be gay or lesbian, and
Like
they
the
would have to
shock
go
treatment and the
shock
horrible things.
treatment and yeah.
Yes.
And so hearing that argument from the other side where it's just a person,
Or pray the
wants,
gay away. That was the other thing. I don't
I
know.
mean, all
Yeah.
of those things that we've
Yeah.
just, measures that are just, in hindsight, hopefully to people is stupid. Um, you know, but when you frame it in this context with this, this race of people with Janai and this Soren character, um, wanting the freedom to be who she feels like she is, um, that it speaks volumes to, the core essential principle of the freedom to love, who you want to love, the freedom to be who you want to be, um, and also the idea of feeling like you are born a way. I think that was one of the lines that was Soren
Mm-hmm.
mentioned. I was born this way or that way.
Shout out to Lady Gaga. I believe that's a
Yeah,
Lady Gaga album.
yeah. So I think a lot of those things is just like that's why I think this episode is great because it does what science fiction is supposed to do, which is allow us to think about issues in a different way by holding up a mirror to them in a light that allows you to sympathize with people who are feeling, oppressed, who feel like they can't be themselves, who are feel like societal norms oppress their own right of freedom or individuality. So I think a lot of that is well um, expressed in this episode.
I'm trying to remember. It feels like the Binars in the first season were kind of like that. Um, I don't remember exactly. Remind us in the comments
Yeah,
below.
I
But I
think
remember
you
they
might be
made
right.
it very difficult to tell which were male and female. And I don't remember if that was addressed like, we aren't male or female. I don't quite recall. So that's something I'd love to be reminded of. Do you remember?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there was something about um, gender identity in that as well. But this one really specifically, I mean, with the pronouns, I think that scene it specifically talking about that, um, is an issue where I haven't seen that exact topic brought up.
Right. And
But
also, excuse me, they mentioned or it was written that when they're talking about the pronouns, he asks Soren, he says, do I do male or female or he or she? And Soren says, we have a third pronoun. Oh, because Riker says, what do I call you, it? That would be rude. Soren's like, then
yeah,
don't do that. But Soren says, no, we have a third uh, pronoun or a name that doesn't translate. And I thought that
yeah,
was great because, of course, they do. Of course, they don't have the same
right.
word that we have. Now, of course, one other thing is we have a universal translator. So theoretically, Soren should not have to translate what that word is. Soren could just say the word and it would translate to something. But this was
Mm.
obviously better this way, I think.
Yeah, I don't know that the translator would have everything in it actually.
Right. Well, it wouldn't have a word that doesn't exist. And
Yeah,
that's what the
yeah.
situation was. So I think that was better this way.
Yeah, but I did think that I thought the questions that were being raised were really great philosophical ones, and the one that specifically was asked to Riker was like, what is the difference between a man and a woman? Right? It was like a very basic question, but you can see Riker like, oh, well, like how do I answer this question? And he answered it in a nursery rhyme, which
Yeah.
is
Puppy dog tails.
yeah, snips and snails and puppy dog tails, and it's almost to some degree remedial in that way how we identify, from like a long time ago, just these kinds of sugar and spice are, Mars. Girls are from, you know what I mean? You know
Yeah.
that
Girls are from
uh,
Mars, men are from Venus. Is that how it goes?
something like that. I
Maybe it's the
forgot it, but
reverse. I can't tell.
yeah, but you know what I'm talking
Maybe it's
about.
the
That
reverse with Uranus. I don't know.
yeah, no, that's a different nursery rhyme. But the point is, uh, these kinds of remedial ways are how we identify things as children. You know what I mean? It's just like
Yeah.
you know this and sugar and spice and all these things. But I thought Riker did a great job. I thought you mentioned the sensitivity. I thought he was very sensitive,
While keeping it
and
light and easy.
yeah, and I can see why all the chicks fall for him because he's kind of like he's easygoing. He's no pressure. He's pretty open and honest. He's not a deceiver.
Mm,
You know,
kind
I,
of.
I, I Well, not really, because he walked over to Troy, which I was like, poor
That's
Troy.
nothing. And she just kissed him on the lips. She's like, I understand. Mm. I was like, what? Why did what? Okay. Hey, we got a lot more to talk about. We got to
Yeah,
jump to our
that's
break right now. But
yeah.
you guys, I got my first non-appearance mention in this episode.
I heard. I heard.
Oh man, that boy, oh boy. We'll talk about all this good stuff. We'll be right back on the seventh rule.